Justin Herbert has quickly become a favorite in the fantasy football community based on his hot and electrifying start in his rookie season in 2020. But have we taken that love a little bit too far with his price, and we're actually overvaluing the rookie sensation quarterback? We'll talk about that in this video. Like I said, Herbert set the world and the NFL and fantasy football community on fire last year after a hot start in his first few games as a rookie. I mean, from weeks 2 through 11, he averaged 300 yards per game on nearly 40 pass attempts per game. He was on pace for 39 touchdowns, 11 interceptions on a 16-game pace, and even added a nice rushing floor as well with a pace of over 300 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns on the ground. He was even a QB1 in fantasy football in 7 out of those 9 games that he played and was a top 5 quarterback in 4 of those. The offense as well averaged 28 points per game despite being 2-7 through those first 9 games with Justin Herbert in that stretch. However, something happened in week 12 that was really weird, and I'm not necessarily sure on what it was. I don't know if it was defenses starting to key in on him, if he was hitting a rookie wall, if something else was happening. But Justin Herbert was not the same over the last 6 games of the season. From weeks 12 through 17, he averaged 270 passing yards while still throwing for 40 pass attempts per game. His touchdown pace dropped significantly. He was on pace for only 24 touchdowns and still 11 interceptions over a 16-game pace. His rushing also dropped pretty tremendously to only 8 yards per game on just over 2 rush attempts per game, while still finding the end zone twice, so that's pretty good. But now he finished outside the top 16 in 4 out of 6 of those games for fantasy football, while still also having 2 top 6 fantasy performances as well. But on the flip side though, what was really weird about this is that the Chargers actually went 4-2 over those 6 games to finish the year at 7-9. So that's really interesting that while Herbert's production took a dip over the last 6 games, the Chargers actually had a winning record. So that's really interesting to see. And I don't necessarily know what caused this stretch. You know, Austin Eckler actually came back in week 12 and played all 6 of those games. Keenan Allen did miss the last 3 games of the season. That was when 2 of his top 6 games actually was without Keenan Allen. So I don't understand really what happened, and I don't view it as the schedule getting harder either. I mean, if you look at it, he was the QB 15 against Buffalo, the QB 30 against New England, the quarterback 17 against Atlanta, quarterback 6 against the Vegas Raiders, quarterback 19 against the Broncos, and then ended the year at QB 4 against the Kansas City Chiefs in week 17. So again, I don't know what it was. He got Austin Eckler to come back. He produced without Keenan Allen. The schedule wasn't really that hard. Was it the rookie wall? Was it something that the offense or maybe Anthony Lynn wanted to kind of rein Justin Herbert back from throwing? Even though he attempted the same amount of pass attempts per game, the efficiency just wasn't there for Justin Herbert over the last 6 weeks. Despite all that though, he did finish the season as the QB 10 overall because of his crazy start in the first 9 games of the year. And he has the second best fantasy performance for a rookie quarterback since 2000, behind only Cam Newton. But now we have to, fast forward and look at 2021 because we have 2 different stretches of the 2020 season that we need to address, and we need to, actually talk about and see which one actually translates into 2021. Because we have the insane production at the beginning of the year, first 9 games, most of them were without Austin Eckler. The Chargers were losing, so we have that. Versus the last 6 games where he had Austin Eckler back, Keenan Allen for half of those games as well, but then the Chargers went 4-2. So it's really interesting, and it actually begs the question of which version of Justin Herbert is going to translate to 2021, and should we expect the dreaded sophomore slump? So I dove into the sophomore slump for quarterbacks even more, and I pulled the top 10 rookie quarterbacks who all scored over 200 fantasy points in their rookie year, and I compared their rookie stats to their sophomore stats. And you can see from here that the first thing that you might recognize is only one quarterback on this list really improved fantasy-wise from year 1 to year 2, and that was actually Kyler Murray last year, doing so on hyper touchdown efficiency on the ground while his passing level stayed fairly similar. The closest comparison I think that we have on this list to Justin Herbert is Andrew Luck. Luck also had heavy passing volume in his rookie year. They both threw for over 4,300 yards. Justin Herbert beat him a little bit in touchdowns, and they also had pretty similar rushing production as well in their rookie seasons. Luck's numbers from year 1 to year 2, though, are pretty interesting because if you notice, his passing volume actually dropped from 627 attempts down to 570, and from that, then his passing yardage dropped as well by 500 yards from 4,300 to 3,800. His touchdowns and rushing stayed pretty much the same though, and with all that, his overall fantasy numbers were nearly identical from 2012 to 2013. But we can also look at players from this list like Jameis Winston and Russell Wilson, who had pretty steady passing production from year 1 to year 2, but they were worse for fantasy football because their rushing production took a massive hit, and specifically in the touchdown category. So that could be something that we see from Justin Herbert in 2021, which is what we kind of saw at the end of 2020 as well, where Justin Herbert was averaging at the start of the season 5 carries for 20 yards per game and still finding the end zone a few times as well, to the end of the season where he was only averaging 2 carries for 7 yards. And even though he did find the end zone a couple times, rushing touchdown production is kind of hard to predict while only averaging 2 to 3 carries per game. But then you might also say to me, Addison, Justin Herbert has the weapons. He's got Austin Eckler, he's got Keenan Allen, he's got Mike Williams. They signed Jared Cook to fill the Hunter Henry role. How can he not produce with those types of weapons? And I agree, I like that a lot. But to that, I would also say Baker Mayfield. Just 2 years ago, we were hyping up Baker Mayfield as one of the best young quarterbacks in the league after a record-setting performance in his rookie season in 2018. 2019, he was drafted super high. We were hyping him all up because that offense was supposed to be fantastic. And I mean, overall, statistically, it was pretty good. I mean, both OBJ and Jarvis Landry had over 130 targets each. Nick Chubb rushed for nearly 1,500 rushing yards, and both he and Kareem Hunt actually combined for almost 100 total targets as well. So, there were fantasy players there, and there were weapons that were receiving volume and were pretty good for fantasy football as well. But that didn't translate to Baker Mayfield, and that didn't translate to his overall production. And yes, the Browns, over the last couple of years have been more run heavy than what we expect the LA Chargers to be with Justin Herbert. But I think that the comparison still holds true because Baker Mayfield had weapons, and Baker Mayfield had OBJ and Jarvis Landry and Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, but he still wasn't that good for fantasy. And in 2019, finished as the quarterback 19, despite us as a Dynasty and Redraft community drafting him as the QB4 overall. The final thing I really want to bring up though, and this is just another variable, and I mean, it has various effects on players for fantasy football, but the LA Chargers in 2021 have brand new coaches and a whole new offense for Justin Herbert to learn, which is just another variable for him as he is learning his second offense in just his first 2 years in the NFL. Anthony Lynn is out and the new offensive coordinator for Detroit. Shane Steichen is out and the new offensive coordinator for Philadelphia. In comes Brandon Staley, who's the new head coach coming from being the defensive coordinator for the LA Rams last year. And then Joe Lombardi is the new offensive coordinator coming from being the quarterbacks coach in New Orleans last year and also the former Lions offensive coordinator in 2014-2015. So that's really interesting, and we can look at that. We can look at Joe Lombardi and what he did as the offensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions just 5-6 years ago. And looking at his time in Detroit with Matthew Stafford, we actually have 2 kind of different seasons for Stafford, ironically. In 2014, this was Stafford's first year in Joe Lombardi's offense. He was pretty good. He had 4,300 yards, 22 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, and added an additional 100 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. But he finished as the quarterback 17 for fantasy football. And again, the weapons were still there. The weapons were definitely there. Golden Tate actually finished the year as the wide receiver 12 with 1,300 receiving yards and 4 receiving touchdowns. And they had this other guy named Calvin Johnson who finished as the wide receiver 16 with 1,100 yards and 8 touchdowns. His weapons overall were fantastic, much like what we can project for the LA Chargers with Austin Eckler and Keenan Allen specifically. But Matthew Stafford himself wasn't that great for fantasy football, finishing, like I said, as the QB 17. But I mean, we also have 2015 as well. This was Stafford's second year in Joe Lombardi's offense, where his passing was pretty similar yardage-wise. He still had that 42 to 4,300 passing yards, but his touchdowns jumped pretty significantly up to 32 touchdowns and 13 interceptions, where he finished as the QB 9. And again, Megatron finished as the wide receiver 12 with 1,200 yards and 9 touchdowns, and Golden Tate was the wide receiver 24 with 800 yards and 6 touchdowns as well. So 2 different seasons, like I said, for Matthew Stafford, but that first season specifically, where he did have the weapons and he was, supplying fantasy points to the wide receivers for Golden Tate and Calvin Johnson, Matthew Stafford himself was a QB 17 for fantasy and wasn't all that great. So then we can get to finally his current price in redraft leagues specifically. I love Justin Herbert for Dynasty. He's being drafted as the quarterback 5 currently in DLF ADP, and I absolutely love that. I think Justin Herbert is going to be great for fantasy football and for Dynasty as a fantastic asset to have on your Dynasty teams. But redraft specifically, and for 2021 specifically, I think that this is kind of a different story. He's being taken currently ahead of guys like Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, Tom Brady, Ryan Tannehill, all of whom outproduced Justin Herbert in fantasy points and production last year in 2020. But then we also have the possibility of, what if Jalen Hurts outproduces Justin Herbert in 2021 because of his rushing production? We know how dangerous and how good rushing quarterbacks can be for fantasy football. I think that's a situation in a world that I think definitely can happen where Jalen Hurts outscores Justin Herbert in fantasy in 2021, as well as even Matthew Stafford. Matthew Stafford in a new offense with the LA Rams. He also has pretty good weapons in Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, Tyler Higbee, Darrell Henderson. That offense is pretty good, and it supported, decent fantasy quarterbacks in the past with Jared Goff. But Matthew Stafford is a lot better. Could he have similar production to Justin Herbert in 2021, but at a much cheaper price? So with everything that we discussed in this video, and with the price and with the quarterbacks going behind Justin Herbert, I find it really hard to justify his borderline top 5 quarterback price in ADP for 2021. If you'd like to watch a video of me praising a player for 2021, you can click right up here and watch a video of my breakdown and learn about why I love Kyle Pitts for 2021, even in his rookie season as well. And with that all being said, guys, thank you all so much for watching, and we'll catch y'all later.